The small neighborhood kindergarten playground was alive with laughter that warm afternoon. The sky was bright and clear, and the soft sunlight spread gently across the colorful playground. Balloons in shades of red, yellow, and blue were tied along the metal fence, moving slightly in the warm breeze. A large banner stretched proudly across the entrance of the playground. Happy Father's Day! Teachers had decorated the area carefully for the special occasion. Small tables were set up around the playground where children and their fathers were working together on simple crafts. Some were painting handmade cards, while others were building small wooden toys with glue and tiny hammers. Across the grassy field, children ran happily beside their fathers. Some dads pushed their kids on the swings, while others laughed as they tried to win silly games prepared by the teachers. The entire park was filled with joy. But near the far corner of the playground fence stood a small boy who didn't seem to share that happiness. His name was Liam, only 5 years old. Liam was smaller than many of the other children in his class. His brown hair was slightly messy, and he wore a small blue jacket that looked just a little too big for him. In his tiny hands, he held a colorful card decorated with crooked crayon hearts and bright stars. The card had clearly been made with care, the way only a child could make something with love. On the front of the card, written in large, uneven letters, were the words, "Happy Father's Day." But despite the cheerful message, Liam's expression was quiet. He stood near the fence, watching the other children running toward their fathers. Everywhere he looked, kids were laughing and calling out happily, "Dad, look at this. Dad, come play. Dad, watch me." Fathers knelt beside their children, lifting them up, helping them paint, and cheering them on in games. Liam watched all of it in silence. 2 years earlier, Liam had lost his father in a tragic accident. The memory was still difficult for his mother Emily, but for Liam, the loss was something he didn't fully understand. He only knew one thing. His dad wasn't there anymore. And days like Father's Day made that absence feel even bigger. Slowly, Liam walked over to a small wooden bench beside the fence and sat down quietly. His feet didn't quite reach the ground as he held the card in his hands. He looked down at it for a moment. Inside the card, written in careful but uneven handwriting, were the words he had practiced writing in class earlier that day. For the best dad in the world. Liam traced the letters gently with his finger. Then he looked back at the playground. Children were running across the grass toward their father's arms, open wide, as if the world was the happiest place imaginable. Liam wished he had someone to run to as well. Someone who would pick him up and spin him around. Someone who would cheer for him during the games. Someone who would laugh beside him today. But instead, he sat quietly on the bench, holding a card that no one would receive. Just then, a deep rumbling sound echoed from the nearby street. It was loud and powerful, cutting through the cheerful noise of the playground. The sound of a motorcycle engine. Several people turned their heads as a black motorcycle slowly rolled into the small parking lot beside the park. The bike was large and heavy, with chrome shining under the sunlight. The rider carefully parked near the edge of the lot and turned off the engine. The sudden silence after the loud rumble made the playground noise feel even softer. The rider stepped off the motorcycle. He was tall and broad-shouldered, easily standing above most people nearby. A thick beard covered his face, and he wore a worn black leather jacket decorated with several biker patches. Heavy boots touched the ground as he removed his gloves. His name was Jack. Jack was a member of the Hells Angels Motorcycle Club. He looked exactly like the kind of man who had spent years riding across long highways and facing difficult roads. To most people, he looked intimidating. The type of man strangers might avoid on the street. But today, Jack had only stopped in the area to grab a drink from a nearby convenience store before continuing his ride. As he walked toward the sidewalk beside the playground fence, something suddenly caught his attention. He slowed down. On the other side of the fence, he noticed a small boy sitting completely alone. The boy wasn't playing like the others. He wasn't laughing or running across the grass. He was just sitting there, watching everyone else. Jack stopped walking. For a moment, he simply stood there quietly, resting one hand against the metal fence. The boy looked so small sitting on that bench, holding a card in his hands while other children celebrated with their fathers. Jack had seen many things during his years on the road, but something about the boy's quiet expression made him pause. There was no anger on the child's face, no tantrum, no crying, just quiet sadness. Jack remained there for a moment longer than he expected, and without even realizing it, the rough biker found himself watching the lonely child on the other side of the fence. Jack leaned casually against the metal playground fence, resting one arm across the top bar as he quietly watched the small boy sitting on the bench. From where he stood, he could see most of the playground. Children were laughing loudly as they ran across the grass with their fathers. Some were painting bright Father's Day cards at the craft tables, while others were trying to win small games organized by their teachers. The entire place was filled with cheerful noise. But the boy sitting near the corner of the fence seemed to exist in a completely different world. Jack noticed him almost immediately. The child wasn't playing like the others. He wasn't running, shouting, or tugging on someone's hand. He was just sitting there quietly, holding a small card. Normally, Jack wouldn't have given the situation a second thought. A biker like him didn't usually stop to watch children's events. His life mostly revolved around highways, long rides, gas stations, and the endless sound of his motorcycle engine echoing across empty roads. Stopping to observe a kindergarten playground wasn't exactly part of his usual routine, but something about the boy's expression made him stay. It wasn't anger. It wasn't frustration. It was something quieter. Loneliness. Jack shifted slightly against the fence, crossing his arms as he continued watching. The boy sat still for a few more seconds before slowly lifting his head. That was when Liam noticed him. Their eyes met. For a brief moment, neither of them moved. Most children might have felt nervous seeing someone like Jack standing nearby. The biker's tall frame, thick beard, and heavy leather jacket gave him a rough appearance that could easily intimidate strangers. But Liam didn't look scared. Instead, the boy looked curious. Jack raised his hand slightly and gave a small nod, the kind of silent greeting someone gives when they don't know what else to say. Liam stared at him for another moment. Then, slowly, the boy stood up from the bench. Jack watched as the child carefully walked across the small patch of grass toward the fence. Each step was slow and thoughtful, as if the boy was still deciding whether he should approach or not. Nearby, teachers were busy helping other children prepare for the next game. Parents were laughing and talking while their kids ran around excitedly. No one seemed to notice the quiet moment unfolding near the edge of the playground. Liam finally stopped just a few feet away from the fence. Up close, Jack looked even bigger. The biker's leather jacket was covered with worn patches from years of riding with his club. His thick beard framed a face that carried the marks of someone who had spent a long time on rough roads. To most adults, Jack might have looked intimidating, but Liam simply stood there, holding the card in both hands. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The sounds of the playground continued behind them: laughter, whistles from teachers, and children calling out to their fathers. But near the fence, everything felt strangely quiet. Finally, Liam lifted the card slightly. "My dad can't come today," he said softly. His voice was calm, not angry, not crying, just simple honesty. Jack blinked slowly. There was something painfully real in the boy's words. He looked down at the card in Liam's hands. Bright crayon hearts covered the front. Large, uneven letters spelled out the words, "Happy Father's Day." Jack suddenly understood. Behind them, children continued laughing as they played games with their fathers. One dad lifted his daughter into the air, while another helped his son build a small wooden toy. The entire playground was filled with moments between fathers and their kids, except for one. Liam stood there quietly, holding the card meant for someone who wasn't there. Jack shifted slightly, unsure what to say. He wasn't exactly known for having gentle conversations with children. But the boy continued, standing there patiently. After a moment, Liam slowly opened the card and showed it to Jack. Inside, written in careful but uneven handwriting, were a few words that looked like they had taken a lot of effort to write. "For the best dad in the world." Jack felt something tighten slightly in his chest. He looked back at the boy. Liam wasn't crying. He wasn't asking for sympathy. He was simply standing there with the quiet hope that someone might listen. The sounds of laughter and celebration continued behind them. But Liam stayed where he was, holding the card carefully in both hands. Then the boy took a small breath and asked something Jack never expected to hear that day. The little boy stood quietly near the playground fence, holding the handmade card in both of his small hands. The colorful card looked almost too big for his tiny fingers, and the crayon hearts on the front were slightly smudged where he had held it too tightly. For a moment, Liam simply stared up at the tall biker standing on the other side of the fence. "Just for today," he said, quietly. His voice was soft, almost lost among the cheerful sounds of children laughing and running across the playground behind him. Jack bent down slightly so he could hear the boy more clearly. The biker rested one hand against the metal fence as he leaned closer, his large frame towering above the small child. The little boy slowly lifted the card and held it toward him. For a moment, Jack didn't understand what Liam was trying to say. Then the boy spoke again. "Will you be my dad?" The question hung in the air between them. Everything around them seemed to pause for a second. The laughter from the playground continued, but for Jack, it suddenly felt distant. For a moment, he didn't move. He simply stared at the small boy standing in front of him. Jack had lived a rough life. He had been in bar fights, ridden through violent storms, and spent countless nights traveling across empty highways where danger could appear at any moment. He had faced angry men, broken roads, and long, lonely nights with nothing but the sound of his motorcycle engine keeping him company. But somehow, this simple request from a 5-year-old boy felt heavier than anything he had experienced before. Jack slowly lowered his eyes toward the card Liam was holding. The front of the card was bright and colorful, decorated with crooked hearts and stars drawn with crayons. Across the front were the words written in big, uneven letters. "Happy Father's Day, Jack hesitated before carefully opening the card. Inside, the message was written in shaky handwriting that clearly belonged to a young child who had tried very hard to make it perfect. For the best dad in the world, Jack felt something tighten deep inside his chest. It was a strange feeling, one he wasn't used to. Most people who saw Jack only noticed the tough biker exterior, the thick beard, the heavy leather jacket, the patches that told stories of long rides and dangerous roads. People rarely expected someone like him to feel something emotional. But standing there in front of that small boy, Jack suddenly felt something he couldn't quite explain. A quiet ache. He slowly looked back down at Liam. The boy was still standing there patiently, watching Jack's face as if waiting for an answer that meant everything to him. Behind them, the Father's Day celebration continued. Children were racing across the grass with their fathers. One dad lifted his daughter onto his shoulders, while another helped his son fly a colorful kite. The entire playground was filled with moments between fathers and their children. Except for one. Liam. Jack closed the card gently and handed it back to the boy. For a moment, he didn't know what to say. Across the playground, Liam's mother Emily had just arrived through the park entrance. She had been running late from work and hurried across the grass, scanning the crowd until she finally spotted her son near the fence. But when she saw who Liam was talking to, her heart jumped. Standing beside her child was a large biker with a thick beard and a leather jacket covered in patches. From a distance, Jack looked intimidating. Emily quickly walked toward them, worry written clearly across her face. "I'm so sorry," she said nervously as she reached them. Her voice carried a mix of embarrassment and concern. "He just misses his father." She placed a gentle hand on Liam's shoulder, ready to guide him away before the situation became awkward. "I didn't mean for him to bother you," she added quickly. But before she could pull the boy away, Jack finally spoke. Well, he scratched the back of his beard thoughtfully. Jack looked around the playground for a moment. Fathers were playing with their kids. Children were laughing, calling out happily as they ran through the grass. Then Jack looked back at Liam. The boy was still holding the card carefully, watching him with quiet hope. Jack sighed softly. "I guess." He paused for a moment. "I've got some time today." For a split second, Liam didn't react. It was almost as if the words hadn't fully reached him yet. Then, suddenly, his entire face lit up. His eyes widened with excitement, and a huge smile spread across his face, the kind of pure joy that only a child could show. "Really?" Liam asked breathlessly. Jack gave a small nod. "Yeah, kid," he said, with a faint smile. "Just for today." And in that quiet moment beside the playground fence, something unexpected happened. A tough biker who had spent most of his life riding alone down endless highways had just agreed to become a father, if only for one very important day. The rest of the afternoon slowly turned into something no one had expected. When Jack had first agreed to spend a little time with Liam, he hadn't really thought much about it. In his mind, it was just a small favor, a simple way to make a lonely child feel a little less alone on Father's Day. But as the event continued, that small promise began to grow into something far more meaningful. The teacher soon gathered the children and their fathers near the middle of the playground for the next activity. One of the teachers clapped her hands with excitement. "All right, everyone," she announced cheerfully. "It's time for the Father's Day sack race." Immediately, children ran across the grass toward the starting line, dragging their fathers behind them with excited energy. The field quickly filled with laughing families as everyone prepared for the silly race. Liam looked up at Jack, his eyes shining with excitement. "Can we do it?" he asked eagerly. Jack looked down at the small cloth sack Liam was holding. The biker chuckled softly to himself. "Well," Jack said with a small grin, "I haven't done a sack race in about 30 years. But I guess we can try." Liam's face lit up with excitement. A few minutes later, the two of them stood at the starting line with several other fathers and children. Jack carefully helped Liam step inside the sack, making sure the boy held the top tightly so he wouldn't fall. "Ready?" Jack asked. Liam nodded enthusiastically. The teacher raised a whistle. The entire field went quiet for a moment. Then the whistle blew. The race began. Children and fathers started hopping forward awkwardly across the grass. Some moved quickly, while others immediately lost their balance and fell into the grass, laughing. Liam started hopping forward beside Jack, trying his best to keep up. But halfway across the field, his foot slipped and he tumbled forward onto the grass. For a moment, Liam looked surprised. Then Jack burst out laughing. The sound was deep and genuine, the kind of laughter that comes from pure joy rather than politeness. Liam quickly started laughing too. Jack reached down and helped him back onto his feet. "Come on, partner," Jack said with a grin. "We're not losing this race." Together, they hopped toward the finish line, both of them laughing so hard they could barely keep their balance. When they finally crossed the finish line, Liam threw his hands in the air like he had just won the biggest race in the world. "Did you see that?" he shouted happily. Jack chuckled. "Yeah, kid, I saw it." Nearby parents watched the moment with curiosity. At first glance, Jack looked like the last person anyone would expect at a kindergarten Father's Day event. His tall frame, thick beard, and worn leather jacket made him look like someone who belonged on a highway rather than a playground. But as the afternoon went on, something surprising became clear. The tough-looking biker was incredibly patient with Liam. After the race, he moved over to the craft tables, where children were building small wooden toys with their fathers. Jack sat beside Liam and carefully helped him hammer tiny nails into a small wooden toy car. "Easy," Jack said gently, guiding the boy's hand. Liam concentrated hard, sticking his tongue out slightly as he worked. Tap, tap, tap. Finally, the toy car was finished. Liam lifted it proudly. "We did it," he shouted. Jack smiled. "You did it, kid." Throughout the afternoon, Liam laughed more than he had in months. For the first time in a long time, he didn't feel different from the other kids. He wasn't the boy without a father. He was just another kid having fun with his dad. A little later, Liam suddenly grabbed Jack's hand and started pulling him across the playground. "Come on," Liam said excitedly. Jack followed, slightly confused. They stopped near the swing set. Liam quickly climbed onto one of the swings and looked back over his shoulder with a huge grin. "Come on, Dad," he shouted happily. The word caught Jack completely off guard. "Dad." For a brief moment, Jack froze. The word echoed quietly in his mind. He wasn't used to hearing that word directed at him. He had spent most of his life riding alone, traveling long highways with his motorcycle club. No one had ever called him Dad before. But Jack didn't correct the boy. Instead, he walked behind the swing and gently pushed it forward. Liam laughed as he swung higher into the air, the warm sunlight shining across the playground. "Higher," Liam shouted. Jack pushed the swing again. And again. The boy's laughter echoed across the playground as he soared through the air. Across the field, Emily stood watching the moment from a distance. At first, she had been nervous seeing her son talk to a large biker. But as the afternoon unfolded, she began to realize something she hadn't expected. This rough-looking stranger had given her son something she couldn't give him herself. A moment of happiness he had been missing for so long. Tears slowly filled her eyes as she watched Liam laughing freely on the swing, for the first time since his father had passed away. Her son looked completely happy again. As the warm afternoon slowly began to fade, the golden sunlight stretched long shadows across the playground. The joyful noise that had filled the park all day gradually began to quiet down as the Father's Day event came to an end. Teachers started collecting the craft supplies and folding up the small tables that had been set up earlier. The colorful balloons tied to the playground fence moved gently in the evening breeze. And the bright banner that read Happy Father's Day fluttered softly above the entrance. Families began leaving the playground one by one. Children walked beside their fathers, some still holding the handmade cards they had proudly given them earlier that day. Others sat on their dad's shoulders, laughing and talking excitedly about the games they had played. The entire day had been filled with moments that children would remember for a long time. Near the entrance of the park, Liam stood quietly beside Jack. The little boy still held the small wooden toy car they had built together at the craft table earlier. He turned it slowly in his hands, as if trying to hold on to the memory of the afternoon just a little longer. His face showed two emotions at the same time. He was happy, but there was also a quiet sadness in his eyes. The special day was coming to an end. Jack stood beside him near the gate, his large frame casting a long shadow across the ground. The tough biker looked out across the playground as it slowly emptied. Children were leaving with their fathers. For most of his life, Jack had been used to moments of silence like this. He had spent years riding long highways alone, with nothing but the sound of his motorcycle engine and the endless road ahead. But today had been different. Today he had spent an afternoon in a place he never expected to be, a kindergarten playground. And somehow it had meant more to him than he thought it would. Liam slowly looked up at him. The boy took a small step closer. "Thank you for being my dad today," Liam said quietly. His voice was soft, but his words carried a deep sincerity that only a child could express. Jack looked down at him. For a moment, the tough biker didn't know what to say. He wasn't used to moments like this. Most people only saw Jack as a rough biker, someone who rode fast motorcycles, wore a leather jacket covered in patches, and lived life on the open road. People rarely expected someone like him to be standing in a playground saying goodbye to a 5-year-old boy. Jack slowly crouched down so he was closer to Liam's height. For a moment, he studied the boy's face. Liam looked proud, but there was also a quiet sadness in his eyes. The boy knew their day together was ending. Jack gently placed a large hand on Liam's shoulder. "You're a brave little guy," Jack said calmly. The words were simple, but Liam smiled when he heard them. Behind them, Emily stood a few steps away, watching the moment unfold. Her heart felt full of gratitude for the stranger who had turned what could have been a painful day for her son into a memory he would never forget. Jack slowly stood back up. The sky above the playground had begun to turn soft shades of orange and pink as the sun moved lower behind the trees. It was time for him to go. Jack walked across the small parking lot toward his motorcycle. The large black bike waited exactly where he had parked it earlier that afternoon. He pulled on his gloves and swung one leg over the seat with the ease of someone who had done it thousands of times before. When he pressed the starter button, the motorcycle engine roared to life. The deep rumble of the bike echoed across the quiet evening air. Jack paused for a moment. Then he turned his head back toward the playground one last time. Liam stood beside his mother near the park entrance. The little boy raised his hand and waved excitedly. A huge smile spread across his face. Jack gave a small nod in return. Then he slowly turned the motorcycle toward the road. As the sun dipped behind the trees and the sky grew darker, the biker rode away down the quiet street. Liam continued, waving until the motorcycle disappeared from sight. The little boy held the wooden toy car in his hand and smiled. Sometimes heroes don't wear capes. Sometimes they don't appear in big dramatic moments. Sometimes they simply show up when someone needs them the most. And sometimes those heroes ride away into the sunset on a motorcycle, leaving behind a memory that will stay in a child's heart forever.